We thought we'd be talking Georgia politics, and we will, but I'm just curious, your first blush reaction to this one, the president deciding that loyalty is what matters most. How does that collide with electability?
Yeah, I mean, that's always the rub, right? I think you're seeing Donald Trump trying to play Kingmaker in Texas as he has in other states. We've seen this unfold in Indiana. We saw it late last week in Louisiana. And so I think you're seeing the president continue to push the boundaries on that and really try to make his endorsement go a long way.
Well, and we have a mixed track record for President Trump when it comes to these endorsements in primaries specifically. Take here in Georgia and Herschel Walker. And I wonder if you think the president may be misguided in terms of his primary selections with general election dynamics in mind in November. Is Ken Paxton the more dangerous choice? Yeah,
potentially. I mean, I think John Cornyn probably had the stronger case to make in a general election. And, you know, that's always the rub. How candidates fare in a primary versus that general election. And I think we are ground zero here in Georgia for that dynamic, as you mentioned, with Herschel Walker. Also, the president endorsing David Perdue against Brian Kemp in 2022. And so we have an independent streak here in Georgia. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out today and in the weeks ahead.
Before we move on to some of these races in Georgia, should we assume that John Cornyn
that's a good point.
is down and out? I mean, he's going to be on the ballot. He's got a lot of supporters and he's got a lot of money.
He does, yeah. No, I think this is a huge test for Donald Trump. We've seen him be successful in the previous weeks, but Texas is a different dynamic. John Cornyn has a tremendous amount of goodwill and name ID there, but that race is in neck and neck, and I think it's going to be a photo finish for sure.
Boy. Well, we'll all be looking for the outcome of this one next Tuesday. We may have to wait longer for an outcome in another runoff here in Georgia because he has not decided to endorse in this Senate primary either. You have two Republican congressmen, Mike Collins, Buddy Carter, and Derek Dooley, who has been endorsed by the governor. Brian Kemp, the president, has not weighed in on this one. Is he causing this to go to a runoff and more money to be spent Republican on Republican instead of shifting their focus to running against the incumbent Jon Ossoff? Yeah,
this has been a protracted primary that has gone on for well over a year at this point. You mentioned, obviously, Congressman Mike Collins. He's been seen as the front runner in this race for well over a year, followed by Congressman Buddy Carter. Derek Dooley, who the governor has endorsed, has been surging of late. There is some thought that he is going to make it into second place after tonight. And then what does that runoff dynamic look like? Does the president decide to engage? If it is Mike Collins and Derek Dooley, that sets up for another Kemp versus Trump showdown potentially with the implications big as ever.
Well, Clash of the Titans. Why is the governor putting so much of his capital behind Dooley? He could have ended this himself.
He could have. He was obviously, everyone wanted Brian Kemp to run. He's had a tremendous record here in Georgia as our governor. I think his decision to go all in on Derek Dooley has left some questions with people in Republican circles here. But again, this is someone who has the strongest record of any Republican here. He has the strongest favorability and job approval ratings of any Republican here. And, you know, look, underestimate Brian Kemp at your own peril. But I think this is going to be a really steep hill for Derek Dooley to climb.
Well, how steep is the hill to defeat Jon Ossoff, whoever wins this primary? Because going into this midterm cycle, Ossoff obviously was characterized, and perhaps you still think rightly so, as the most vulnerable incumbent Democrat. Given national politics and the economy and approval of the president's handling of the economy where it is, do you still think that he stands a real chance of losing his seat?
I do, but I think Republicans have made it more difficult with this protracted primary. We're, regardless of who wins, either tonight and in 4 weeks, is going to be at a significant resource disadvantage. You have a very popular incumbent senator in Jon Ossoff who is going to stockpile resources and have the cash advantage. But at the same time, we are a battleground state. He has taken a number of very vulnerable votes that I think are not going to sit well in a general election environment. But is that enough in the environment that we're in to keep him from getting reelected? I don't know. You may have another runoff in November, as crazy as that is.
Yeah, well, and gosh, I guess, does this go to a runoff on the gubernatorial race as well? Obviously, this is an open contest, and we do have an endorsement here from Donald Trump and Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones. How much does that mean here in Georgia?
It does mean a lot, but that's another race that's neck and neck. Obviously, you have billionaire outsider Rick Jackson, who has come into this race and completely up into this race.
Big bucks.
In most polls, he spent well over $100 million. In most polls, he is the front runner right now. I expect after tonight, I think it's going to be a close 1-2 finish between Rick Jackson and Burt Jones, and then it's going to be 4 weeks of a knockdown drag out to see who wins. But I think that is another instance where Donald Trump's endorsement carries power, but what are the limits to that? I think he's testing it here in Georgia.
Well, and when we consider who they could be against, Keisha Lance Bottoms, of course, the former mayor of this city where you are joining us from, is seen as the front runner on the Democratic side. She actually was able to secure the first post-presidency endorsement from former President Biden. Obviously, Georgia has had statewide Republican leadership for some time, even as we saw 2 Democratic senators sent to Georgia in recent years. What would it mean if we were to see a gubernatorial flip in this state?
It would mean the environment is very, very bad for Republicans nationally, and that has trickled down here in Georgia. Obviously, we are a battleground state. I think we are still a center-right state on most days, but we saw this dynamic play out in 2022 when you had 200,000 voters vote for Brian Kemp and Raphael Warnock. That is the segment of the electorate here that is going to determine who wins in November, and that is the segment of the electorate that I think is going to be paying attention to how the national environment looks the most.
Looks like redistricting is about to land on your doorstep here, joining the ranks of many states around the country. Knowing that would be for the next cycle, there's still a lot of focus being paid to the Supreme Court seats that are up right now as well. Because of that issue, I've heard more about those 2 seats than any other since we've been here. What do you expect to happen? Are they flippable?
They are flippable, and I do expect, I think the Democrat challengers to those seats probably have the upper hand right now. They've had tons of national Democrat money pour in to what would otherwise be very sleepy judicial races. I think the Democrat...
Barack Obama involved in this.
Correct.
Harris, Holder.
Lots of national figures. I think their game plan was, let's try to sneak up on these races and see if we can flip them. I think given early voting turnout, they are on track to potentially do that. There was a ruling yesterday from the Judicial Qualifying Commission that potentially there may be some questions about ethics violations there in those races, barring them from doing things that they can't do. So that'll be a really interesting wrinkle to unfold. If they were to win, will they then be seated, or will this be a problem for them?
We just have 30 seconds left, but what is the one thing Republicans need to have change between now, the primary, and the general in November if they want to improve their odds?
Yeah, I think that we've got to stay focused. I think we've got to be united here in Georgia. I think that starts with Donald Trump and Brian Kemp getting on the same page. I think that's critical to our success. But we've got to continue to talk about kitchen table issues, and we've got to focus. There's a great record here in Georgia, despite what's going on nationally, of Republicans being able to deliver that. I think that's what we've got to focus on.